has also risked the sovereignty of these nations. Djibouti, Kyrgyzstan, Laos, Pakistan, Tajikistan are just few countries, and they own more than half of their foreign debt to China. To know more about these Chinese actions and intentions, we have with us two distinguished experts with us today, and I'll be inviting both of them. First, I'll be inviting Dr. Abhishek Pratap Singh, who is assistant professor in Deshbandhu College in the University of Delhi. He is a PhD and MPhil from Jawaharlal Nehru University, and he has been a fellow of South Asia Democratic Forum, Brussels. He has also been a visiting fellow, Center for India Studies, Shenzhen University, China, and a visiting scholar, International Law University, Beijing International Studies. His academic works has been extensively published, and he has contributed various papers, book chapters, book reviews, and has been a part of many conferences. I welcome you, sir, to this webinar, and we are fortunate to have you today as the expert speaker. I'll now invite you, sir, for your address. Over to you, sir. Sir, your audio is a bit on the lower side, sir. If you can just be a bit louder, sir.
Audible now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Much better, sir.
Good evening and thank you very much, Search Siddharth.
Sir, your voice was again gone, sir. We cannot hear you, sir.
Audible?
Yeah, sir. It is on a lower side, sir. If you can just check on the mic, sir, because your voice is quite low.
Audible now? Is it okay?
Yes, sir. This is okay now.
So, thank you very much for having me discussion. Congratulate the team. Before I speak on this subject, to aid and diplomacy, and has always been the part of the see these 60s and 70s states that they had insisted on the of economic partnership for one China such principle on which that is to agree. But other than that, bilateral economic cooperation established while establishing the other. So, what I'm trying to say is that if we go background, 50s and 60s, what we see is that there has been important that aid serve the strategic purpose that has been the understanding of Chinese scholarship since the 80s when the Chinese started and when we started seeing this Chinese development financing Chinese model. So these aid projects have always played important. That is Chinese development export China. These activities have been recent years they have been transformed. Shanghai, Shanghai Bank, Bank said AIIB Bank, and now under the BRI. So there is a background to that in terms of building relation, building cooperation. See, has goes back. Now in the early 2000, China initiated its Western program through the Western Development Program. The idea was Western region of China not allowed to develop in comparison to coastal cities. Must was put front of the development, and in order to in order to successfully argue and successfully develop their system, China came up with policies which envisage the greater interaction Western states, Western to Asian, to Asian region, deeper station. In 2013, you see the Belt and Road, the idea came up, and it was very well understood as a sign of BRI basically comprises the China's strategy, which identifies with the Chinese dream. And it is one of the fundamental objective of Chinese foreign policy and key pillars China stand. Now, various scholars and various think tanks that this geopolitical initiative basically some strong economic implication have in terms of China's greater engagement around the same time. This new idea was coming up in Chinese, where there was oversupply of actually European countries, and China was going to establish some kind of new market link. So the domestic compulsion in terms of the domestic compulsion in terms of there was domestic compulsion in terms of
Hello.
new normal, and
Hello.
of course greater desire
Sorry for the
the
Hello.
interruption, sir.
grand strategy
I
in terms of
think the voice is still breaking so much, sir.
Yes, sir.
We are not clearly getting anything.
just
Must be a issue with the microphone, I believe.
Yeah, maybe. I think still there is some problem.
Please unmute yourself, sir. It is showing that your voice is, yeah, has now unmuted, sir. But we are still not getting the audio.
audible or not?
Sir, your voice is still breaking. So, like, we are not getting the complete sentences.
Clear?
Please go on, sir. Your audio is still not audible at our end, sir. We are not getting audio from your end, sir.
ये आवाज तो आ रही है.
Yeah, sir. Your voice, it's still on a very lower side, sir. It is as if the microphone is a bit far from where you are speaking, sir.
Here, no.
So we can hear you momentarily, but if you can go ahead,
You
sir, so like we can check about the audio, sir. We are not still getting
you
complete
have.
sentences from your end. We are just getting bits and pieces, sir.
I would suggest Varnam first, then maybe.
Sir. No, sir. We are still getting incomplete sentences, sir. So like we are getting bits and pieces of your audio, but I think there is a issue with your internet connection, sir, or either with the microphone, sir. If you can permit us, sir, we can go ahead with Dr. Aparna ma'am's address, and then we can have your address, sir. So if you can permit us with that, sir.
Yes, yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. So, Dr. Aparna ma'am, I will now invite you for your address. But before that, I'll be giving a very short, brief introduction about you. Dr. Aparna is Assistant Professor in Center for International Relations in Central University of Jharkhand. She holds a PhD from Banasthali Vidyapith, Jaipur. She has been instrumental in course curriculum development in the 5-year integrated program in Center for International Relations, Central University of Jharkhand. She has a number of significant publications and has participated in various national and international seminars. Her area of interest are South Asian studies, India's foreign policy, and Gandhian thought and peace studies. I welcome you, ma'am, to this webinar on Chinese debt trap diplomacy. And with our motive to spearhead this discussion on this topic, I will now invite you for your address. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much for your kind words, and very good evening to each and everyone who is present and who is attending this webinar. And I hope I'm audible to everyone.
Yes, ma'am, you are perfectly audible to us, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much. Regretfully, this thing has happened, internet connection and all, and that is the main problem. When we do some webinar, it happens every time. Anyways, without wasting my time, I have been given to 20-25 minutes to speak for this particular topic, and I will not do injustice with this time. I will try my best. So the topic that is here is China's debt trap diplomacy, and we are going to discuss upon it, especially the critical part of this debt trap diplomacy. So when we see the history of international relations, international politics, and especially the history of realism, we find that since the Melian dialogue was conducted between the Athenians and the Melians, at that time, during the Peloponnesian War, since then the power was the key factor of international politics, or the relationship between two countries. It was every time it was being decided by the powerful part. It was the only reason because of which, if you can read upon the Melian dialogue, you will find that Melians were given no choice by the Athenians to be neutral or to keep themselves apart from the war. The reason was simple. Athenians has said, this is not your choice to take decisions. Why? Because you are powerless and we are powerful. So this is the scenario. World has not changed much since then. Still in the international politics, in this global village where we are residing, where we are breathing, in this Coliseum, you will find that still the relationship between two countries are being decided by the power tussle, by the power symmetry. This China's debt trap policy is also a story of the same. What by starting in the starting of this webinar, the very first statement was given and was given by the host, and he has quoted American analyst, political analyst, statesman John Adams, and he said that there are two ways to conquer and enslave a country. One is by sword, and other is by debt. I agree to this point very clearly. And the history also says and indicates about the same, that in past also what Britain has done, what the other European countries has done to this world, when they have by suo moto, by their white man's burden concept, when they have started with the idea of colonizing this world, of imperializing this world, at that time also the policy was almost the same. Here, when we call debt trap, it is very much clear that it is a trap, right? It's a negative connotant. And especially if it is about China, who is seeking to be a new global power, who is seeking to be a new hegemon in this, not only in this region, but in this globe, you will find that, especially through its OBR project, One Belt, One Road project, which is almost costing of $1 trillion. He is supporting infrastructure projects in the strategically located countries, though who are weak, though who are developing, or though who are underdeveloping countries, but strategically located. In these areas, China is investing a much. What is wrong in that? The simple question should come to our mind, because in foreign policy, in the very first beginning of when we start with the foreign policy, and when we start with the lesson of international relations as a student of international politics, every time we read about that any country's foreign policy goal is to secure its national interest, then what is wrong in that, what China is doing by its debt trap policy, by giving debt to the other countries, or by offering debt? It is seeking more leverages, more advantages from those countries. What is wrong in that? Nothing is wrong, right? We will discuss that how it is wrong and what part it is wrong, why we are calling it as a trap, why we are not calling it just as a debt, but rather than that, we are calling it as a trap. And through this trap, how China is manipulating its interest, how it is maximizing its interest. It is important too, and this will be the haunting side of, this will be the main focus of my today's interaction with you all. So the key chain, by what is the main tool by which China is offering these debts to the people, to the developing countries or to the underdeveloped countries? What is the main tool of this trap? Then you will find the main tool of this trap is promising investment as well as easy credit. These are two simple ways by which China is trying to get leverages, strategic leverages, as well as commercial penetration in that particular region, right? Especially this promising investments and easy credit. Then one question again appears to our mind, that why not these countries, though who are aware of Chinese debt trap, though who are aware of Chinese hidden agenda, why they are seeking these debts from China, why they are not going to the IMF, why they are not going to the World Bank rather than going to China's trap? The simple thing is, the simple reason is why? Because China is not part of the Paris Club. What this Paris Club is about, actually, these Paris clubs gives a certain kind of limitation as well as delimitation to the debts that one country gives to the other country. But China is out of this Paris Club. So because of this reason, because China is out of the Paris Club, I'm just letting you to know, to understand how this trap works, right? Because it is out of this Paris Club, by its own ways, by its own willingness, it gives credits as well as debts to its own terms and conditions to different countries. And the second important thing, which is the most important thing, is that these terms and conditions are hidden. So countries are not supposed to share these terms and conditions to the other countries. For an example, if A country has taken debt from Chinese government, and if B country is also willing to take debt from Chinese government, then A country is not supposed to share its terms and conditions with the B country. Right. So it is very importantly, it is very sacred. Right. And these countries are not allowed to share its terms and conditions with other countries. The next important thing is they are supposed to create a particular account number to the Chinese funds they are supposed to provide, and that their interests is also being guided. It is being it is supposed to being circulated as well as controlled by the Chinese government and by the Chinese companies. So these are few things which is important to know, and because of which we are not calling it just as a Chinese debt, but we are calling it as a Chinese debt trap. Once a country goes into and once a country takes the debt from Chinese government, forever it is supposed to be the kind of slave of that government, Chinese government, right? And importantly, it is very not very rare. It is very interesting to know that these countries are also not supposed to come out from this debt trap, because these debts can be cancelled anytime by the Chinese government. They can anytime ask you to repay them, and when you will be cancelling and you will be unable to repay them, definitely they will ask you to give share to the particular infrastructure where they have invested. The simple example in front of us is Sri Lanka. Not only Sri Lanka, there are so many cases in Nepal also, in Cambodia, in Laos, in Myanmar, in Thailand, in Pakistan. Everywhere this trap is working successfully, right? I'm quoting Sri Lanka here because it is neighbor to us, and for almost 9 years, because of LTT issue and because of the help that Chinese government has given to the Sri Lankan government in United Nations to save their faces for the crimes that they had met on the grounds of human right violation there during this LTT civil war. Right. So, because of this overwhelmed enthusiasm, they had also taken debt from the Chinese government, right? Especially Mahinda Rajapaksa's government. When this government has lost its ground, and when new government of Maithripala Sirisena has came to the government, and they had campaigned against the Chinese debt, and they had campaigned that we will take you out from the Chinese debt, and in this ground only, usually he got the success and he came into the government. You must be thinking that, okay, the Sri Lankan government has cancelled the things, the MOUs, the kind of credits that they had taken from the Chinese government. Yes, it happened. In beginning, it happened, right? But in the second phase, when Chinese government has asked them to repay it immediately, then this Sirisena government, who came into the power only because they had campaigned against the Chinese government, they had opened more space, they had given more space under the pressure of Chinese government to the Chinese investors. Right. And the reason and the resultant is that the Sri Lanka has given Colombo's port cities project, which is almost $1.4 billion project, to the China, as well as the 80% stake of Hambantota property is also given to the Chinese government. Almost the same thing has happened with the Pakistan and Nepal as well. In Nepal, 75% of the stake of recently a dam was being made by Chinese government, and 75% of the stake was kept there with the Chinese side. The same is with the multi-billion dollar Gwadar port, as well as in Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Thailand, uh, to have control and to have more access to the South China Sea. These people have given, Chinese government has given more debts and they have started controlling this strategically located small developing countries according to their own interest. So, the simple question arises here that these countries, though who are under the trap of, though who are under the penetration of the Chinese government, why they are not aware of and what they are doing for coming out from this trap? Nothing. Simply, once you are into the trap of the Chinese government, forever you are going to be there. That is the arrangement that Chinese government has done. Recently, one institute, Peterson Institute for International Economics, has done a research, has made a review over almost 100 of contracts which has signed between the Chinese government or the Chinese investors and the developing countries, which was among 24 countries. About 100 contracts they have read upon. And what they have found that these Chinese had used these legal contracts to gain hidden advantages over the borrowers. Most of its clauses are very strict and they don't provide any right to the borrowers. So it is very important to understand that why China is making all these claims and why China is doing all these things. The first thing is very clear that it is willing to be the next superpower. And the second important thing, this country, which was once upon a time, which was a land power, now it is seeking to become a naval power as well. So the countries, though who are especially located in the Indo-Pacific region, and though who are neighboring to the South China Sea, these are, and especially the European countries, now few European countries are also under the trap of this Chinese government. So slowly this debt trap is working, and slowly these financially weak countries are coming into the trap of Chinese government. Right. Uh, Hello. Is anybody saying something?
Ma'am, we can hear you. We can hear you, ma'am. You
Okay.
can go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. How much time is left with me, my dear?
Ma'am, we have still 10 minutes.
Okay, fine. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
So, when you will read upon and when you will see that how this debt policy is coming and how China has over the night become, if someone may be thinking like China has become over the night a country who is giving so gently debts to the developing countries, and it is giving money, financial assistance to the countries for their development. It's not like that. The debts that are being given to these developing countries, it is not for the infrastructure, it is not for their development, but rather than that, they are pumping their money, their investment to the projects, to the areas which which give or which are strategically important for them. They hardly think for the development of the countries who are seeking money. Right. I remember here Premchand's Godan, where there was a hero named Gobar, right? Gobar and Thania and all, where the Seth Sahukar has given him 100 rupees, and for generation to generation, he is giving interest to that 100 rupees, and that 100 rupees is still intact, that main money is still intact, and their generation to generation they are repaying the interest of that money. Right. Something it is happening with Chinese debt trap as well. Right. That is the reason because of which today China is officially it has emerged as the world's biggest creditor. In fact, it has surpassed 5% of global GDP, and it is giving more credits in comparison to the IMF, International Monetary Fund, as well as the World Bank. And that is the question mark, which, and that is the actually thing because of which we are supposed to be concerned of the Chinese part. The biggest threat that India as well as the other countries like USA, like Australia, like Japan is seeking in form of China is that China is deemed to be an aggressor country. Since so long, its history is a country which is so aggressive about its neighboring countries, and it is aggressive in its foreign policy. So that is also a reason because of which we are afraid of the rising China. It is not like the peaceful development that is happening in India or the kind of foreign policy we had opted for. No, it is not like that. Quite clear that the case of Ukraine is quite clear in front of us that how it has supported the Russia, the stand that Russia has taken. Right. So it is very important. It is very important to understand that why these countries are concerned of Chinese development as well as the Chinese draft that are being given to the developing countries. These developing countries have no excuse as well as no spare time, no spare space where they can go and they can save their faces because of the lack of unity that you are seeing. Look at the condition of South Asia in this region only. They can take debt from India as well, who has no aggressive past, who has no past of war, who has no past of imposing its policies to the other countries. But still, not only Pakistan, who is called as who is being called as our distant neighbor, but beyond that, if you will see, your smallest country, your so humble country, Nepal, it also doesn't seek support from you. It also prefers to take support from and debt from China rather than you. The reason is quite clear. They are powerful countries in terms of money for sure, but only by giving money they are taking so many other leverages, not only political, not only economic, not only cultural, but it's strategical as well. So because of its aggressive past, we are afraid of China. We are afraid of the Chinese growth. We are afraid of the Chinese debt trap diplomacy. And once upon a time, if you can recall, the cheerleader of communism, the cheerleader of socialism that they say, that they call upon their self, that they are the socialist country, they are the communist country. Once upon a time, if you can recall, that Lenin has said that imperialism is nothing, but it is the highest stage of capitalism. And that is the menace that we are seeing in front of, which is in front of us in form of China and the Chinese debt trap policy. That once they have become capitalist, once they have become capitally sound from their inside, now they are giving and they have started pumping their money. They have started colonializing. Neo-colonialism's new phase is in front of us in form of China. So we have to be very clear and we have to be very careful about Chinese debt trap. And the solution that I can see in front of which may be applied to save ourselves from Chinese debt trap is the unity of the developing countries. Without this unity, without this fairnessness, nobody can say that we will be saving ourselves from the Chinese debt trap. I hope I'm resting my word from here, and I will be happy to answer the questions that will come from your end. And I think I have done justice with the time, isn't it?
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for extensively covering
Okay,
this topic, ma'am. And I'll now invite Dr. Abhishek
thank you so
Pratap
much.
Singh, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. You are now perfectly audible, sir. Please go ahead.
Thank
Yeah,
you
sir,
very
I
much.
can also hear you perfectly.
Thank you, Dr. Aparna, for that very fascinating presentation. Um I was pointing to the fact that there's a history about how the Chinese aid and how the Chinese economic diplomacy works upon the history. Because if we see in the 50s and 60s when China started diplomatic engagement with the other countries, one of the line that would identify one of the principle was that economic cooperation with other countries will boost Chinese national interest. And so when in 1980s when the Chinese economy started booming up, we see this role of role of aid and economic diplomacy coming up when Chinese aid being given to other countries. So the development financing started in the Chinese diplomacy in the 80s, and what we see in terms of BRI is just an extension. So there is a background to that. What I'm trying to suggest. The second thing I had insisted that in the early 2000s, China had started the Western Development Program, in which the focus was to develop Western region and improve the connectivity of Chinese Western region, which was trailing in their development parameters with the Eurasian countries, with the Asia, with the Europe. And in that uh, background, China started looking towards economic engagement under what they called as Belt and Road Initiative, which eventually led to China's debt trap diplomacy. So BRI preceded China's debt trap diplomacy. Third thing is that it also has a domestic compulsion. Chinese economy started shifting to the new normal, what they call, and the new normal insisted that there must be shift in focus to Chinese supplies in the European region, in the Western countries, and the Eurasian region, and the Asian and other African new market must be identified so that there is a balance between the supply and demand. So all these things culminated in 2013 with the Chinese coming this with this idea of Belt and Road Initiative. Now, Belt and Road Initiative, as conceived, was is kind of geopolitical strategy, which has developing economic finance and providing infrastructural assistance to the other countries. However, in some time, what we see that this geopolitical strategy, or which some called as a grand strategy, Chinese grand strategy to claim dominant in the Asia and the global politics, they started questions coming up. And one of the questions was that in 2018, American National Security Advisor John Dalton argued that BRI is nothing but advancing Chinese global dominance, and there are high rate of economic distresses coming in the BRI. That means the countries which are taking infrastructural assistance from the BRI are going to face tough challenges in terms of returning. Similarly, in 2017, US Secretary Rex Tillerson insisted that what we see under the BRI is the kind of a predatory economics, which is designed to result in kind of financial defaulting, and then these economic defaults will be converted into financial debts. So now that is when the in around 1780s, through these statements and through other studies, that we see the debate started that China started pursuing a debt trap diplomacy, luring poor and developing countries into some kind of very unsustainable financial cooperation agreements in the name of providing infrastructure assistance. And failing which, the idea also came that debt these debt traps are now reconverted into kind of some kind of leasing and some kind of other benefits to Chinese. So this debt trap became a double equity debt trap, where the countries which were failing to repay the loans were asked to provide concessions to the Chinese. So, and in 2018 also, the Mike Pence, one of the U.S. Vice President, criticized China for using the debt trap diplomacy, and he used the reference of Sri Lanka and Malaysia in how the Chinese, in the name of infrastructure project, China is basically attracting and making a strategic investment in the countries. So on the one hand, this debt trap diplomacy is disallowing the recipient countries from their economic sovereignty, and on the other hand, failing the repayment of loans, they are losing on their political sovereignty in terms of leasing land to the Chinese, standing together China on political issues on the global level. And so it started. Now, When this debt trade diplomacy argument came up, now the Chinese side also came with their story, and they said that first of all, they argued that this is not a kind of a debt trade or infrastructure assistance. This is purely an economic project. And number one, number two, they said that the BRI, the very idea of BRI, is very very poorly fragmented, and it can never have some strategic objective. If it has to have some strategic objective, it needs to be more focused. They also insisted that these infrastructure assistance are recipient driven. China is not providing assistance. The countries which are seeking assistance and which are finding it difficult from getting assistance from the World Bank or IMF, they are reaching out to Chinese economy, Chinese leadership, and then China is providing the assistance. However, later on, these assistance are converted into kind of a debt trap. So the Chinese version was also there. Now, other context is that in around 2000 you see the Chinese economy in 2000 slumped from average growth of around 10% during 2000 to less than 7% in 2015. So China needed these kind of contracts and projects in terms of promoting infrastructure in other countries. So there is a domestic compulsion also, and there is also some studies, like one of the studies which was done by World Bank, which insisted that the global infrastructure demand is high, and in order to finance that global infrastructure demand, more developed countries and global donor agency need to contribute more to the developing world. So China took this as a right opportunity and at the right time, with the global infrastructures booming up and with global donor agencies failing to meet because on the grounds of certain global benchmark in terms of track records of government, in terms of whether they are democracy or not, in terms of respect for human rights. So on the other hand, there was the global demand of infrastructure, and on the other hand, there was a lack of support from the donor, and this is where these Chinese made their entrance. And many Chinese bodies like China Development Bank, Export Import Bank of China, the ADBC, Agriculture Development Bank Corporation, also Shanghai Cooperation Bank, New Development Bank, which is said, and the BRI initiative, AIIB. All these initiatives started coming up with these kind of assistance. Now, um, if you see the entire investment which has been done in the BRI, there are almost 68 countries. Amongst them, there is almost 8 trillion of the vast network of investment that has been provided in terms of promoting transportation, energy, telecommunication infrastructure in Europe, Asia, and Africa. And in terms of infrastructure financing initiative, large part of global economy, in the name of that large global economy, will be serving the purpose. But Chinese have the economic, foreign policy, and security imperative. Now, I would like to highlight some of the figures that would like to highlight how this data diplomacy has led to. Now, there is one example in the African country of Montenegro, is one where China has loaned almost $800 million to build an highway. And when we see the Montenegro GDP, I mean, these 65% of his GDP has more than quarter shares of Chinese public debt. So you see, the highway is being promised by the Chinese state. That highway is built on the huge cost. When the Montenegro fails to pay that huge cost, what we see that the country goes into the kind of deficit financing, and quarter of that GDP is owned by the now owned by the Chinese. Now, through by owning what Chinese are able to do, that they are able to dilute the level of political sovereignty. They're able to influence the independent foreign policy. They're also able to garner support for the Chinese actions at the global level. They're also able to influence the role of that country. Another example is also of the Kenya. Now, in Kenya, what Chinese did was that there's a highway that was built by the Chinese, and as per the estimates, I would like to say that China-backed railway line in Kenya also reportedly went to loss making because there was no demand. So what Chinese do, that all these infrastructure projects are basically based on the principle of oversupply, over construction, over infrastructure building, and over financing. And once these things are not able to complete, these countries face economic distress. Similarly, there's a 4.5 billion Djibouti Addis Ababa line, which has also received some kind of financial stresses, and there's an operational cost. For example, there's a China-Europe railway line which is being built, and one of the estimates suggested that 45% of this railway line is being built on the surplus capacity. So that is also going to make loss making for the ventures. Similarly, in case of in case of in case of Tanzania, you see there was the other problem with the debt diplomacy is when all these things started coming up in the countries, especially in the Asia and Africa, there was domestic resentment against the Chinese, the civil society, the political opposition, the public intellectuals started writing and speaking. So the Chinese also has to face some kind of criticism. So, for example, Tanzania is one state which cancelled almost 10 billion of the port project, which was given to China under the pressure. Now, in Nepal, there's two hydropower plants which are being again built by the Chinese were cancelled in opposition to which can lead to some kind of debt trap. In a country named Sierra Leone, there was an airport which was being built at the city named Mamama, and that was cancelled under the pressure because that may lead to this kind of debt trap diplomacy. Kenya also suspended a highway which was being constructed at the cost of 2.5 million from the Chinese assistance. Even in case of Myanmar, we see that a port project was devalued, and the area and the investment was cut down in order to reduce the Chinese influence. On the Sri Lankan side, the Dr. Aparna has spoken much in detail, so I will not touch that part. So what I'm trying to say is that all these examples make a case that how Chinese infrastructure investment in these countries has led to oversupply and has led to overfinancing, which are beyond the capacities of recipient countries, and it is also leading to kind of a civil society unrest, domestic criticism, and and a very comfortable level of political opposition, leading to cancellation of projects in these countries. Now, how China is able to do that? Number one is the infrastructure gap. As I told you that one of the estimate by the World Bank suggested that there is a huge demand for infrastructure. So when these countries are not able to draw the finance, China comes in and provide these infrastructure gaps. Second is that second motivation is that uh, most of these infrastructure assistance are politically motivated. They override the rational economic outlook. So rather than economic compulsions, in order to in order to in order to attract strategic, resourceful, energy-rich areas and an important location in the Africa and in the Asian countries. What Chinese do that they plan these economic imperatives with the political motivation. So this is one. Third is of course the track record of governance. Most of these countries you see are semi-authoritarian or semi-democratic setup. So for the Chinese, which itself is an authoritarian state, it becomes easy to cooperate with semi-authoritarian states which have a poor governance record, which have a very corrupt bureaucracy, which have a very less accountable political system. So all these things are very easily matching with the Chinese political system. So there is an easy way to lure the political leadership in different ways. So now, given that case, in case of China, for example, you see there's one data that in around 2016, 61% of the government sustained budget was being deficit finance, and much of that share goes to China. So this debt crisis has been precipitated in a very calibrated manner by the Chinese diplomacy, and under the name of BRI, it has grown in the last one decade. Now, another important question is comes the what is the way out for this? I mean, how this can be brought to an end, and how this can be controlled. Now, there are three four suggestion I would like to insist. First of all, that there must be a greater responsibility for the evaluation of potential projects. All these projects which are being designed in the name of providing infrastructure assessment. The recipient countries and the countries which are participating, if it is a kind of trilateral, there must be a proper evaluation done about the potential economic cost, the implications, the environmental implication, and whether there is a viable financial sustainability with that project. So this will, in one way, will be able to keep a check on the Chinese debt trap diplomacy. Second is that policymakers in non-BRI still, especially the countries which are not part of the BRI, and China's aiming to lure them with these kind of with these kind of economic actions, need to be more aware and also looked for the other alternative development assistance. I mean, countries which are already taken debt and infra assistance can maybe reassess and reevaluate, but countries which are out of this these Chinese debt trap diplomacy need to focus on alternative development financing options so that they are at equidistance and they're not being lured by the Chinese assistance program. Third is, of course, the role of the civil society and political opposition in countries which are likely to be the victim of Chinese debt trap diplomacy. So the political leadership, the political opponents need to be made much aware and informed about how the Chinese diplomacy, how the Chinese debt trap diplomacy has weakened the countries like Malaysia, Sri Lanka, Tanzania, Morocco, Montenegro, India, and even Pakistan, the CPEC, the investment which is going nowhere, given the uh, Afghan instability. So if we are able to build on that, then of course there is a likely chances that the Chinese debt trap diplomacy can be kept under check, and other countries, especially the poor developing countries which are falling in the Chinese trap by agreeing to these unsustainable loans to pursue infrastructure projects, can be saved from any kind of future financial difficulty. I think I'll stop here, and thank you very much for the time. I hope I've been able to speak and do justice on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for your address, sir. There is one question from the participants, and it is for you, sir. So she asked that how can India play a role in countering the Chinese debt trap diplomacy, because we are not economically that sound, we are not that economically giant as China is. So what should be the policy of the Indian government to counter this?
So I will give you the example of AIIB. Under the AIIB, Indian government has also got some kind of assistance, but most of these assistance has been taken after the proper cost benefit analysis, proper evaluation of the project, and from where the grant is coming. So the way India has drawn money from the AIIB can be an example for the other countries which are going in any kind of infrastructure cooperation with the Chinese to check the balance sheet of the donor countries, the donor companies, donor agencies, and also make a cost benefit evaluation before before going in any kind of economic cooperation with the Chinese. As far as countering, India is already providing assistance. You see under the AF, Asia Africa corridor, there is a India Japan cooperation that is going on. India is also providing assistance to the Nepal, to the East Asian neighbors. India recently provided assistance to the Maldives and Sri Lanka, to the Afghan stability. So India is not in any kind of competition of countering China. We are providing necessary assistance wherever it is required. You have seen the corona pandemic, where the Indian diplomacy was much active in terms of providing humanitarian assistance without any cost to Chinese. So the Indian model of building economic cooperation under the AIIB projects based on proper evaluation and proper cost benefit analysis could be an example for the other countries before entering into any kind of agreement with the Chinese. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. There is one question which has been asked from Dr. Aparna ma'am, and the question is that China we see is has its influence in international bodies as well. It doesn't only influences countries, but it also influences international bodies, and that influence is growing to greater strength with each passing day, like we see in the World Health Organization during the Corona crisis. So where do you see the world going in next 5 years?
Yeah.
I'm not I'm not an astrologer who can comment where the world is
So
going, but
this question has been asked to Dr. Aparna ma'am.
okay, thank you.
Okay. No, no, it's okay. Sir is willing to answer this question. You're most welcome, sir. You can also answer this question. But as sir was saying that he is not astrologer, simply things cannot be predicted in the way of in the perfect manner where world is changing every day, every night. But for sure, in the way that China is growing, it's a kind of use scary thing for all the world leaders, and everyone is thinking for it. But the one negative thing is that in Chinese past as well as at Chinese end, as I have said, that China has aggressive past. China has aggressive history. So countries, though who are aware of Chinese political phase as well as its aggressive phase, definitely they should be aware of, and they will be aware of Chinese terms and conditions and Chinese hidden agenda. So definitely one day, not to very short end, but to a longer end, definitely Indian foreign policy will be at more winning end in comparison to the Chinese policies. And that is the reason because of which you will find that China's hard policy is now turned into the Chinese soft policy, and they are now more strategically opting for soft diplomacy rather than hard diplomacy.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank
We have reached, thank you, ma'am. So we have reached the end of this session and it is 6 p.m. now. And I'll take this opportunity to thank our expert resource person for this webinar, Dr. Abhishek Pratap Singh sir and Dr. Aparna ma'am for their highly informative session on Chinese debt trap diplomacy. Certainly, Chinese debt traps is something which all countries and their policy making bodies must understand about. And I sincerely hope that all the participants attending this session from the WebEx as well as from our YouTube live session must have learned immensely. We thank both our resource persons for their great presentation over the subject, which has uh, captured the essence of the Chinese debt trap. I will also like to thank our founder, Mr. Abhishek Ranjan, who not only established Red Lantern Analytica as a think tank, but also guides us every time during organization of such an webinar. I thank the participants for their involvement, and with these words, on the behalf of Red Lantern Analytica, I would like to express our sincere thanks to all the academicians and research scholars who have joined us today. We express our heartfelt gratitude to both of Dr. Abhishek Pratap Singh sir and Dr. Aparna ma'am once again for taking out time from their busy schedule and making this session possible. With your due permission now, sir and ma'am, we can bring this session to a close.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. We will be sharing the YouTube link with also you, ma'am, and sir, so that you can have this as a reference for the future
Thank you,
sessions also.
thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you
Thank
so
you, sir
much.
and ma'am.
So nice.
Thank you.